Hello, Brobs. We're back with The Dream of Dracula in Search of the Living Dead by Leonard Wolff, a 1972 book on vampires. Chapter 4 and the Taste of Blood. And the Taste of Blood. At the fog shrouded edge of the world, Odysseus, as Circe had instructed him, invoked the dead. He dug a pit, poured mead and wine into it as a drink offering, then water, then white meal. Then it was time for prayers. Finally, he took the sheep and cut their throats over the trench, and the dark blood flowed forth, and lo, the spirits of the dead that be departed gathered them from out of Erebus, brides and youths unwed, and the old men of many an evil days, and tender maidens with grief yet fresh at heart. And these many ghosts flocked together from every side about the trench with a wondrous cry. The Odyssey, Book 11. Riddles. There is a rickety hill. On this rickety hill stands a rickety house. In the rickety house is a rickety room. In the rickety room is a rickety table. On the rickety table is a rickety cup. In the rickety cup is something everyone's got. What is it? Blood. As I was going down London Alley, I met my sister Sally. I broke her neck and sucked her blood and left her in the alley. A bottle of whiskey. As I was walking in the field, I met old Father Gray. I ate his meat and drank his blood and threw his hide away. A watermelon. I don't know what the hell that's about, but interesting. Last night, as a way of bracing myself for today's bloodletting, I used the borrowed stethoscope to listen to the sound of my heartbeats. Edgar Allan Poe in The Telltale Heart says that a heart makes a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. But Poe was not listening to my heart, which makes a noise at once funnier and more frightening. What I heard was a distant thoop, 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 which, when you consider that my life depends on that noise, is pretty funny and not quite a laughing matter. It's hard to maintain one's poise as a would-be king or a counselor with thoop, 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 thoop echoing in one's ear. And as for my vision of myself as a lover, thoop, thoop takes care of that pretty well. And yet, as Dr. Herman Schwartz, who is about to tap the vein in my right arm, assures me, thoop, thoop is a healthy sound. What would be dangerous are any of several variations on that measure, like thoop, birther, thoop, bird, boom, or the petrifying galloping rhythm of the badly diseased heart that goes thoop, tha, 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 boom, thoop, tha, 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 boom. If my thoop doesn't sound romantic, Dr. Schwartz tells me, it is steady. There, inside my chest, my loyal heart is doing its unobtrusive duty, as it has for 48 years, working in the dark, night and day, sending my blood on its mysterious circuit. Now, kindly Dr. Schwartz, with his disposable needle, his disposable plastic tube, and his clear glass bottle, stands by to interrupt, to steal from the life-sustaining flow. He plunges the needle into my arm. I know he is skillful, and it doesn't really hurt, but I hate the knowledge, not the feeling of steel in my vein. I do not like being meddled with. On Dr. Schwartz's office walls, his wife Leah's serene watercolors comfort me, but I am writing a book on Dracula, and Dr. Schwartz is an expert not only on blood, but on that strange species of green plants known as succulents. As the first thick drops of blood run through the pallid yellow plastic tube into a clear bottle, I choose to feel the moments turning sinister. I am flowing away. Myself is dripping into the bottle. Dr. Schwartz says, if you make a fist and squeeze once in a while, it will flow more freely. That's me, darkening the yellow tube. That dark red thick stuff welling into the bottle is me. When I do what he has told me to do and make a fist, there is a spurt into the bottle so thick and hasty, I have to hide the gasp I feel. Dr. Schwartz is a friend whom I've known for years. I have nothing to fear from him. Robin Hood, too, had a friendly physician, a holy man into the bargain, who, the ballad tells us, bled good Robin to death for the sake of Mother Church. There are many versions of the tale, but the one that I hear as my blood drips into Dr. Schwartz's bottle tells how Robin, having taken a fever, he hied him with all speed unto a nunnery, with intent for his health's sake to bleed. A faint a faithless friar did pretend in love to let him blood, but he by falsehoods wrought the end of famous Robin Hood. Thus died he by treachery that could not die by force. That's it. Squeeze a little, says Dr. Schwartz. I squeeze, and again there is a rush of my life into his bottle, making a roseate spume along its sides. My thooping heart, darkly jaunting in its hiding place, is ignorant of where my blood is going. Dr. Schwartz is my friend. I am not worried, but a treacherous leech this friar was, to let him bleed to death, and Robin was, methinks, an ass to trust him with his breath. The great Yiddish writer Itzhak Manger, whichever, has a poem in which the world's first murderer, Cain, stands musing over the fallen body of his brother, Abel. Cain is puzzled and awed as he watches his brother, who seems to be asleep but is not. There has been a transformation in Abel, but what it is, the young murderer cannot grasp. Though he feels it as somehow beautiful, Cain wants to know, does the beauty lie in my acts, or is it perhaps in thee? Before the day is done, speak, answer me. It is an emblematic moment, and it is easy to see it here, as in the Bible, as standing for an occasion of bewilderment, as one primitive hunter who did not especially mean it to happen, learns the relationship between the flow of blood and the vitality of the man who angered him. Cain, in Manger's poem, struggles with a number of feelings. He is exhilarated and perplexed. He feels a loss and a sense of loneliness, but there is something else as well. Unable to handle the situation himself, he calls for a witness. Come, Father Adam, and look at the scarlet ribbon of blood that wriggles along the earth and smells so sad and good. Well, blood smelling sad, it smells disgusting. In this fragile language, Manger, or is it Manger, has managed just the primordial urge to taste blood of the enemy one has slain. Cain, of course, does not drink Abel's blood. In Jewish tradition, such blood drinking was anciently forbidden. Coming as early as, the prohibition against it in the Old Testament are frequent. Coming as early as Genesis 9th, chapter 4, but flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall not eat. Prohibitions against blood drinking are sprinkled throughout Deuteronomy and Leviticus. The reason given is that the life of the flesh is in the blood, and it is the blood that maketh atonement for the soul. Despite these warnings, the armies of Saul, the first Jewish king, pursuing and defeating a Philistine host, were so famished that they fell upon their enemies' cattle, devouring the beasts, blood and all, for which King Saul made his soldiers do penance. Later, Ezekiel scolds his people for similar disobedience. The pagan world took blood equally seriously, but recognizing it as the stuff of life, it made sense to them to incorporate animal and sometimes human blood in those of their ceremonies in which life was asserted. Thus, the worshippers of Cybele, the great mother who was associated with Attis in a fertility religion, used blood as a revivifying symbol. According to the myth, the goddess mother loved the youthful, virgin-born shepherd Attis with a pure love, but Attis died, either slain by another or by his own hand. In the latter version of the story, he had been unfaithful to the great mother, and in a frenzy of regret, emasculated himself and died. The goddess mother mourned her dead lover and finally effected his restoration. Thus, in the end, the mortal Attis became deified and immortal. The devotees of the great mother found in the legend an expression of the relationship between Earth and the vegetation cycle, and in their rituals shed blood in honor of life. On the 24th of March, their day of blood, they danced and sang ecstatically. Whirling and leaping, they made 1,000 guests with their feet and their heads. Or is that jests? Is that guests or jests? They would bite their own flesh. Finally, everyone took his two-edged weapon and wounded his arms in different places. The flowing blood was intended to express the worshipper's sympathy for the dead, Attis, and for the grieving Cybele. However, the lacerations so far described had nothing climatic about them. That came later when, as Julian describes it, a worshipper, frenzied with music and entranced to the point of madness with a vision of himself as Attis, suddenly strips off his clothes and with a loud shout bursts into the midst of the crowd and picks up a sword. He takes it and emasculates himself and then runs wild through the city. The rite of the taurobolium, in which the blood of a bull was shed, is from a human point of view considerably more benign. Here, the religious neophyte crouched in a pit beneath a latticed platform onto which a bedecked and garlanded bull was led. At a given moment, the bull was stabbed so that its blood spilled into the pit, spattering the worshipper below, who leans backward to have his cheeks, his ears, his lips, and his nostrils wetted. He pours the liquid over his eyes and does not even spare his palate, for he moistens his tongue with blood and drinks it eagerly. This singular baptism, too, was understood as a regeneration experience. The bloody devotee emerged from the pit drenched in gore in a physical imitation of his first birth, but entering now into life for a second time, cleansed of his old sins. The lore of blood is rich. Certain 18th century Bohemian tribes, in the midst of other cannibalistic practices, also decapitated their prisoners and hurried to drink the blood jetting from the wounds. Fraser, too, tells us that the flesh and the blood of dead men are commonly eaten and drunk to inspire bravery, wisdom, and other qualities. He proceeds to grisly examples of chiefly totemic cannibalism, but there is blood drinking in his list as well. The Tolaki, notorious headhunters of central Celebes, drink the blood and eat the brains of their victims that they may become brave. The Atalones of the Philippine Islands drink the blood of their slain enemies. And blood is useful in healing as well. Menstrual blood mixed with hot wine and sugar was said to be good for corrupt blood. A truly efficacious recipe called for the use of a virgin's blood in the mixture. If one wanted a love potion, sweat and menstrual blood in the drink of the person whose liking it was desired to win were recommended, and one's own blood might also be employed in such potions. Blood has been used to seal oaths, to bind friends, and to confirm the affection of lovers. According to Ornella Volta, a Breton husband, in addition to the traditional hymeneal bloodletting of the marriage bed, inflicted a small wound under his wife's left breast and sucked on it on the evening of their wedding day. Presumably, this was a gesture of fidelity. Among the Arab tribesmen of the Mosul district, however, blood drinking can be a fierce assertion of family honor. E.S. Drower says, I was told of a tribesman who, finding his daughter unchaste, severed her hand, cut her throat, drank some of the blood, and sent the hand round the district to show that he had vindicated family honor. Drower adds that during 1941, a Marsh tribesman told me that if his young wife were caught snapping her fingers in time to music, I will slit her throat and drink her blood out of my hand. Blood is bright, hot, red, glittering, sticky, salty stuff, and the temptation to make an extensive chronicle of its many meanings is difficult to resist, because everywhere one turns, one finds another bit of news more curious than the last. An aboriginal tribesman who mixes blood and clay with which he daubs himself. The rules of Leviticus that segregate menstruating women for a week, four schizophrenic teenagers, boys and girls, forming a monthly blood society in which the boys were required to cut their fingers in sympathy with the girls' menstrual bleeding. The African lily, who will not let a menstruating woman enter the forest because her condition would spoil their hunting, or the newly circumcised Arunta boy of Central Australia, who catches the blood from his wound in a shield and sends it as an offering to his mother, who drinks it. Nor is all the folk wisdom about blood grim. Levi Strauss cites several tales of the South American Indians, which describe how birds came to have colored feathers. Two of the stories are particularly vivacious. There were three children playing before their huts late into the night. Suddenly they saw, descending from the sky, a flower pot with lovely flowers in it. The children reached for the flowers, but they kept shrinking out of reach, so the children climbed into the pot. They were no sooner in when the pot rose toward the sky. The mother of the children, seeing them carried away, rushed after the pot and was able to reach the leg of the last child in it. The mother grasped the leg, but the pot was too strong for her. The leg broke off in the mother's grasp, and from the wound there flowed such a gush of blood that a lake was formed, to which the birds, they were all white at that time, flew to dip either all or some of their feathers, thus acquiring the different colored plumage they have today. Then there is the story of Talk-Wax, the demurrage and trickster who, coming to the house of an old woman, asked for a drink. This old woman, who was looking after her grandchildren, or granddaughter, pointed to some jars that had warm water in them, but the trickster persuaded the woman to leave her granddaughter and go with the jar to the river for fresh water. Toxic wax, meanwhile, put a spell on the woman's jar so that it would not fill, and she was kept busy at the river. I mean, what kind of dumb woman would just keep trying to fill the jar? While the trickster ate the granddaughter and left the stone in her place, when the old woman returned and realized how she had been tricked, she put Toxax wax into a deep sleep. Then she blocked all the orifices of his body, mouth, nostrils, eyes, armpits, penis, and anus with wax. When Toxax wax opened his eyes, he became aware of what had happened as his body began to swell, but he was saved from bursting by the arrival of the birds, who at that time were men, who tried to break the wax seals without success. Finally, a very small woodpecker succeeded in breaking through it. The demurrage's blood spurted through the hole and stained the birds with beautiful colors, all except the crow, which was soiled by the dirt that blew out from the anus. Jesus Christ. What a grim story. My blood gives to the bottle. My blood gives to the bottle. It is a filling. My blood gives to the bottle. It is a filling. Darkly. I don't understand. My blood gives to the bottle. It is filling. Okay. My blood gives to it. Gives to the bottle. My blood gives to the bottle. It is filling, a darkly rich color, an antique luster, as of crimson-stained glass in a window seen from a distance late in the evening. It is my life that is making the pensive loveliness of the moment. I am dying, Egypt dying, and I am half in love with easeful death. This minute I am a friend to long shadows, to the ebbing of the light as I lie in a lassitude that is not quite weakness, but in which courage no longer has a part. I feel a decline, a sad, lingering patience made up of fragments of poetry, drops of blood, snatches of regret, for places not yet seen, imperfect memories of others seen too clearly, voices diminishing, blow, bugle, blow, set the wild echoes flying, and echoes answer, dying, dying, dying. I am not dying. I am giving the blood bank a pint of my blood, and I have plenty left. Dr. Schwartz says, that's it, and pulls the needle from my vein. I hold a bit of cotton over the tiny wound and sit up. 1 pint of blood, Soon it will be flowing in someone else's veins. As I button my shirt sleeve, I have a yearning to know where and whom my blood will flow, but I am not allowed to inquire. The amenities of the gift of blood require that the giver and the receiver stay anonymous. Otherwise, who knows what intrusions, what responsibilities we would dare. Hermann Schwartz, the good doctor that he is, senses how I miss my blood. Cheer up, he says, and from a drawer in his expensive modern desk he takes a crumpled brown paper sack which he hands me. A patient brought them in today. They're freshly picked. Eat. As I open the bag, I get a whiff of plums. They are ripe and soft with the white film of the orchard still on them. Their juice is warm and sweet in my mouth and throat. Dracula, all of whose wet dreams were dry. Say, vampire again, vampire, now slowly, vampire, vampire, vampire. Look around. Whom do you see? Vampire, 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 vampire. Say it in a low voice in a dark room, and even if you are alone, the darkness will thicken. In broad daylight, perhaps you can say it without fear, but notice the frisson of relief, vampire, a word without sibilance that can nevertheless be hissed. Vampire. The letter V sliding like the keen edge of an ice skate on ice, the P scraping more boldly, the vowels howling in microwaves, tiny, tiny sounds made by bats floundering precisely through their caves, their mouths open, their teeth making vowels. Say it in Italian, vampiro, il vampiro, in French, le vampire, in Russian, blah, 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 vampire or upire, Spanish, that's Russian. Spanish, vampiro, ente, fabuloso, o aspecto, que por las noches chupa la sangre de los vivos mientras duermen. If you say it in Hebrew, matzis dam, or in Chinese, I see Hoichul, you may shake off the uneasy feeling inspired by the Slavic root of the Western word. But when the literal Hebrew, bloodsucker, or Chinese, suck blood, demon, reaches you, you are back in the pale regions of the word you know. The 18th century, Tony Favre says, was the golden age of the vampire. As if the great age of reason required the plethora of nightwalkers, shroud chewers, blood drinkers, and revenants as a counterbalance to Voltaire and Samuel Johnson, Diderot and Edmund Burke. Voltaire indeed takes the haughty view that the only vampires worthy of his notice are the oppressors of the poor, the bloodsuckers who exploit their fellow men, and sniffs at the tales of dead men rising from their graves to drink the blood of the living. Still in the midst of the plague that attacked the eastern part of Prussia, official government agents opened the tombs of various dead men in their search for a vampire who was believed to have caused the sickness. Finally, the body of a suicide was deemed to be guilty. The prudent searchers then cut the head off the cadaver, which, headless, was thrown back into its tomb. As a gesture of sympathy, remorse, humor, a living dog was enclosed in the dark to keep the mutilated body company. In 1732, in Serbia and Wallachia, vampirism spread like a pestilence, causing numerous deaths and disturbing all the land. The facts are a matter of history. The people died like rotten sheep, and the cause and method of their dying was, in their belief, what has just been stated. You suppose, then, they died frightened out of their lives, as men have died whose pardon has been proclaimed when their necks were already on the block, of the belief that they were going to die. Well, if that were all, the subject would still be worth examining, but there is more in it than that. The writer of these lines, Dr. Herbert Mayo, a 19th century English physician, is referring to a particularly notorious case of vampirism reported in the village of Medugna, near Belgrade, in the year 1731. In that year, the people of the village complained that there was a vampire loose among them who had killed several persons. So urgent were they that à la fin le gouvernement si vite ablige d'inquiétude Finally, the government was obliged to inquire. The government personnel who undertook the investigations were commanded by the regimental surgeon Johannes Fluckinger, who was assisted by regimental surgeon Itzhak Siegel and regimental surgeon Johann Friedrich Baumgartner. Additional signatures to the report they made include those of Lieutenant L.S. Obrist and Sub-Lieutenant L.S.J.H. von Lindenfels. The language of their attestation shows them intuitively fending off the skepticism of a later age. Fluckinger writes, after having taken the preceding actions, the heads of the vampires were cut off by Bohemians de passage. Their bodies were burned and the ashes thrown into the Moravia, while those bodies found in a state of decomposition were returned to their tombs. I affirm, I and the assistant surgeons dispatched to me that all these things happened just as we reported them in Serbia on January 1732. And the lieutenants assert that with their own eyes they have seen all that has been reported on the subject of vampires, and that it is all vrai et si passé and notre presence, notre signature and fait foi, true and took place in our presence. Our signatures bear witness thereto. What was it that with such solemnity they claim they saw? The story requires a bit of telling. Some 5 years before the time of the alleged ravages of the vampire in Medugna, a young man named Arnold Paoli returned from military service in Casanova. He was an industrious, good-looking youth who had some property and was regarded as a good catch for their eligible girls in the village. One in particular set her heart on him, a girl named Nina, who was in every respect ideal for him. She was pretty and rich, the daughter of the peasant whose property adjoined Arnold's, but best of all, she loved him. So the village was surprised to see him resist what seemed to be the inevitable. Finally, Arnold confessed to Nina that he feared to marry because in Kosova he had been bitten by a vampire, and he was not yet sure he was free of its taint. Nina reassured him that her love would conquer all, but before their nuptials could be celebrated and Nina's faith put to the test, Arnold had the bad luck to fall from a hayrick to his death. Within a month, the village became miserably aware of his presence again. He had returned in the form of a vampire, and soon thereafter there were 4 human victims of his depredations, as well as several cows. The hayduck of the village suggested that Arnold's body should be dug up. It was, and Arnold was found to be in fine physical condition. More than that, his body was perfectly preserved, the flesh not decomposed, the eyes filled with fresh blood that poured also from the ears and nose, soiling his shirt and shroud. His finger and toenails had fallen off, and new ones had grown in their place, from which one concluded that he was an arch-vampire. The dry military report from which thus far I have been quoting merely says, Selon les costumes de la basse, on lui en fouca une piètre à travers la cour. According to the practice there, a stake was driven into his heart. He gave a great cry, and there was a strong gush of blood from his heart. The body was burned that same day, and the ashes cast into his tomb. Dudley Wright in 1914, quoting from an unidentified source, describes the scene more circumstantially. He has a solemn cast of characters who, on a gray morning, in early August, move through the churchyard. Beneath one particularly lofty stone, ornamented with grotesque Gothic carvings, they find Arnold's grave in Wright's version. The name is Arnaud. The work of throwing out the earth was begun by the gray, careful old sexton. Near the grave stood 2 military surgeons and a drummer boy who held their case of instruments. The sexton lifted the lid of the coffin. The body had become inclined to one side. Then, turning it straight, "Ha ha, what? your mouth not wiped since last night's work? Montague Summers, whose cheerful habit it is to embroider his sources, mentions Dr. Mayo, but goes his own way. The coffin was rather roughly dragged out of the ground, and the gravedigger's assistant soon knocked off the lid. It was seen that the corpse had moved to one side, the jaws gasped wide open, and the blub lips were moist with new blood, which had trickled in a thin stream. From a corner of the mouth, all unafraid, the old sexton caught the body and twisted it straight. So, he cried, you have not wiped your mouth since last night's work. Dudley Wright's drummer boy keels over in a faint at this point, but he is revived with the splash of water in his face just in time to watch the stake being driven through the vampire's heart. At the sound of the monster's dying groan, the boy cries, "Murder! Murder!" as he rushed wildly with convulsed gestures from the scene. Pardon. Sad to relate, Arnold's brief time as a vampire turned out to have been extraordinarily productive. While some of his victims were soon identified, pierced with stakes, and their bodies destroyed, the vampire evil nevertheless returned to the village 5 years later. Within a space of 3 months, several, or 17, depending on which text one reads, victims succumbed to the ravages of bloodsuckers. When their graves were opened, some were found to be in the vampire condition. Most of them were young people between the age of 16 and 28. Oh, man. But Wright reports an 8 and 10-year-old vampire among them. Tony Fave, who is usually trustworthy in these matters, says that there was un enfant de 8 jours, enter depuis 4 20 jours, fut reconnu également en état de vampire. An 8-day-old vampire, 8 days and 90 days in the grave. Poor toothless little beast, doomed, thrice doomed. The end of this corpse-populated story had already been related. The vampires among the dead had their hearts pierced with stakes, their heads cut off, their bodies burned, and the ashes thrown into the Moravia, except for the plethora of bodies and the unimpeachable attestation that the events described were true. This is a prototypical tale of vampire visitations, and they do not all take place in Slavic haunts either, though there is no doubt that Central Europe was a favorite place for them. In Ireland, where there are no snakes, Montague Summers reports the ancient existence of a vampire called Deirdre, or red bloodsucker. He tells also of the quiet little town of Plaisdell, Rhode Island, where a certain William Rose burned the heart of his recently deceased daughter because she was a revenant who was exhausting the vitality of the remaining members of the family. Summers, however, does not tell us whether she drank blood. England, too, has had its share of vampires. To William of Newbury, a 12th century monk, is ascribed the story of a revenant in Buckingham County who terrified his wife and other members of his family. The Bishop of Lincoln, a kindly man it would seem, because he could not bring himself to order the offending body burned, did manage to cut short its visitations by causing to be placed on the fresh and entire corpse of the dead man a written statement of absolution which stopped the visitations. And in the north of England, the grave of a vampire was opened by one of his sons, who pierced his father's body with a stake, causing a great quantity of blood, which plainly proved that a large number of persons had been his victims. However, England was not, until Dracula chose to go there, good hunting country for vampires, and the record of their presence there is not very full. Pardon? Montague Summers, whose indefatigable willingness to discover them everywhere compelled him to write the two fullest accounts of vampirism ever made, explains the dearth of cases in recent years as follows. Never mind my snuffing. This is not so much because they do not occur as rather that they are carefully hushed up and stifled. As evidence, he quotes the speculations in 1924 of the Honorable Ralph Shirley. Although we are not today familiar with the Slavonic type of vampire, strange cases come to light occasionally when people are the victims. By their own confession of something of a similar nature, the vampire in these cases being an entity in human form who indulges in intercourse with someone of the opposite sex. Italics mine, LW. Such cases are today, generally speaking, promptly consigned to one of our lunatic asylums and do not reach the public ear. Naturally, these things do not get in the papers. To the remarks by the Honorable Mr. Shirley, Summers adds approvingly, such cases in truth are happening every day, and I have met with not a few instances in my own experience. Tony Fave, the author of Les Vampires, seems pleased that France, too, has few vampire stories in its history. However, the ubiquitous Summers has found this one in Jessie Adelaide Middleton's Another Grey Ghost book. Miss Middleton's description of her nobleman vampire, the Viscount Moriev, has a certain Dracula-esque quality to it. The Viscount was very tall and thin with a high, almost pointed forehead. Thought it said forebeard, but I was going to say, how many fucking beards can you have? And protruding teeth. Under an air of suave courtesy and kindness, he concealed a ferociously cruel disposition, which he manifested shortly after the French Revolution by cutting off the heads of various of his peasantry. Mrs. Middleton says it is not surprising to hear that, in return, he himself met his death by assassination. If the living Viscount was a problem, he became even more troublesome as a corpse. Not long after his death, young children began to die, all of whom bore the vampire marks at their throats. Now, either this vampire was exceptionally tenacious, or his peasantry were singularly unschooled in the popular ways of dealing with such creatures. Whichever was the case, the bloody Viscount de Morave managed to keep up his forays against the peasants and their descendants for 72 years. Finally, the vampire's grandson, succeeding to the title and disliking the taint of his grandfather's reputation, decided to put an end to the slaughter. Miss Middleton says, the services of a man specially successful in such cases were obtained, and the vault was opened in the presence of the authorities. The old Viscount's coffin, after 72 years, was perfectly strong and sound. The lid was removed, and the body was found fresh and free from decomposition. The face was flushed, and there was blood in the heart and chest. The skin was soft and natural. New nails had grown on both hands and feet. When a white thorn stake was driven to the Viscount's heart by the expert, blood and water poured forth, and the corpse groaned and screamed, after which the body was burned on the seashore, and not unexpectedly from that day the child deaths ceased. It does not take much hard thinking to recognize that l'instinct sexuel est plus perturbateur de tous les instincts doit être siete en première ligne comme l'un des facteurs les plus importants du vampirisme. Someone translate that in what I actually said to what it's actually supposed to be. Indeed, Dudley Wright so far departs from his traditional treatment of vampires as blood drinkers that he gives various instances of beautiful women who find their way into the arms of delighted and often surprised young men whose pleasure is marred somewhat the next day when they find that they are lying beside stinking, or in the other ways, foul corpses. Saint Hippolytus, according to Wright, was resolute in his resistance to a particularly importunate, lovely woman. So resolute was he that when he found he could not put her off by fair words, he threw his stole around her neck and strangled her. Afterwards he found frequently in his arms an evil-smelling corpse, which he recognized as the body of a woman who had been dead for years. Right, to do him justice, gives the story only the dignity of a legend rather than offering it as fact, but it bears notice for the way in which it fuses the elements of necrophilia with the more normal erotic meaning of the Lilith legend to which the story is connected. Lilith has been romanticized as the evil but luscious first wife of Adam, the one for whom Adam's male descendants secretly yearn. She is the dark lady of every man's imagination, the woman who compels him by a sexual fascination so intense that he quite willingly dies in her service. She is the antic fever in the blood, not to be cooled by anything as sedate as marital embraces. The perpetually warmer flesh in the eternally forbidden bed, the embrace that kills. Originally, her myth was not quite so fascinating. Rather, she was said to be the spiritual first wife of Adam before he was given, one of flesh and blood. Adam seems to have been always unlucky in his wives because Lilith was so little enchanted with him that one day she pronounced the ineffable name of God and was thereby transported immediately into the air and flew away. Adam, in his plaintive way, asked God to compel her to return. The angels God sent caught up with her at the Red Sea, where in one version of the story they threatened to drown her, and in another to kill 100 of her children daily. Lilith, says Louis Ginsburg, preferred this punishment to living with Adam. Some sort of compromise was reached between Lilith and the angels, which left her free to go her way, permitted by God to assail newborn children, boys until their 8th day, girls until their 20th. Hence she became the child-stealing witch, whose type is widespread around the world. God, however, is merciful, and Lilith can be kept at bay by a talisman hung in the room in which a child is being born. It reads, Adam and Eve, Lilith, Avant, Sinoi, Sin Sinoi, and SMNGLF, which last are the names of the angels with whom her bargain was made. To vampire historians, her child-stealing proclivities are less interesting than her traditional role as succubus. Ernest Jones identifies her directly as one of that breed of female demons who sucks the vital juices of her men victims. Of course, the vital fluid in this context is blood, and Robert Graves does indeed see Lilith as related to the Empusae and Lamia, emissaries of the triple goddess Hecate. The Laminae, beautiful women who used to seduce, enervate, and suck the blood of travelers. The Lamia, who served Keats as his model for sexual fear and sexual fascination, had a Greek origin. Her prototype was said to be a clandestine mistress of Zeus, whose children Hera caused to be put to death. Like Lilith, her Jewish cousin, the Lamia, avenged herself by stealing the children of mortal mothers. Sir Francis Varney, the hero villain of Thomas Prest's romance, Varney the Vampire, has more lives than a cat. Hanged, stabbed, shot, drowned, he waits only for a generous play of moonlight over his cadaver to resume his moody career among the living. Varney was fortunate. For hundreds of years, no one was ever solicitous enough to kill him once, and for all out of reach of the moon's rays. But in China, where the vampire Kang Sai was feared, the relatives of the newly dead took great precautions that the coffin was light-proof before it was laid away. The Kang Sai, Tony Fave reports, had powers and limitations very like those associated with his Western blood-drinking cousin. By day he was inert, but he rose from his tomb at night to waylay passers-by, whose blood he sucked in a manner so swift that he could drain the lives of many persons within only a couple of hours. The Chinese vampire, however, had none of the suavity associated with Dracula or even with Sir Francis. Instead, the Kangsai moves through the world of night, easily recognized by his long fingernails and the white hair that covers his body. Fave says that to rid oneself of a Kangsai, ill fought détruire les tout en un jour corps et serez-vous par les fous? Body and coffin destroyed together in a single day by fire. If possible, however, one tried to prevent a Kangsai from happening. To this end, the bodies of the dead were often exposed to the air as a way of hastening their corruption, because a vampire will not inhabit a corpse already decayed. However, if such precautions were not possible and a Kangsai possessed the body, it was best to get it to the flames at once. Otherwise, with time, it could become an ethereal creature, no longer bound to return to the grave, and freer, therefore, to move about on its wicked errands. If one was unfortunate enough to be embraced by a Kangsai, the way to make the creature let go was to drive 7 bits of jujube into the spinal column of the monster. India has vampires too. In Jaipur, they take the form of old women who nightly climb the housetops from which they let down magic threads into the bedrooms of sleepers whose blood the threads enable them to drink. She doesn't look very old. What, she thinks she's a fucking millennial? The popular contemporary print, The Goddess Kali. Then there are the Vitalis, dead Hindus whose bloodthirst makes them attack drunk or insane women in their sleep. But the most dramatic emblem of the vampire in India is surely Kali herself. She is the goddess variously of the feminine principle, the dark mother, or the goddess of time, or the goddess of death and instruction. Sir Richard Burton's translation of the Balal Pashisi in English, Vikram and the Vampire, has a description of the black goddess at her typical best naked, her head half severed, partly cut and partly painted, resting on her shoulders, her tongue lolled out from her wide, yawning mouth, her eyes red like those of a drunkard. She was robed in an elephant's hide, with a belt composed of the hands of the giants whom she had slain, and wore 2 dead bodies for earrings, her necklace of bleached skulls. Her 4 arms supported a scimitar, a noose, a trident, and a ponderous mace. She plays no vampiric role in that strange Hindu book of wisdom riddle tales that Burton so much enjoyed translating, but in a note that goes with the above description, Burton renders her in one stroke as the self-nourishing, self-destroying vampire of all time. He tells us she is pictured with her tongue out because, not being able to find victims, this pleasant deity, to satisfy her thirst for the curious juice, cut her own throat that the blood might spout up in her mouth. Kali has been known to drink the blood of her worshippers as well as her own. A designated victim shut up before her altars was found dead in the morning, his life drained away by the goddess. Vampires, one is tempted to say, have appeared almost everywhere that men have bled. India, China, Tibet, North Africa, Borneo have vampire legends. So do the North and South American Indians, whose vampire makes a trumpet of his mouth, which he then introduces into the ear of the sleeper and sucks his brain. Vampires are to be found in the lore of the Polynesians, the Australians, the Nepalese. The most agile vampires are those found in Africa. Among the Yu, an Adzi is a spirit dwelling in a sorcerer. This Adzi sucks blood, drinks coconut water, and palm oil. The Adzi flies about and looks something like a firefly, and if anybody dares to catch hold of it while in this shape, it changes into a human being immediately. If an Adzi sees a good-looking child, it may suck its blood until it dies. The Basso have bloodsuckers instead of cannibals. The bloodsucker begins work by undressing, and when completely naked, it gets out of its own skin. What remains is a mass of red flesh. It sits on the mouth of those whose lifeblood it intends to suck. Such a peculiar being has one member more than ordinary humanity. This is a sucking apparatus protruding from the anus like the trunk of an elephant. This member it ejects from its body and inserts into its victim's mouth and nostrils to suck all the blood out. But there is also a flying species. The latter have lighted torches protruding from their armpits and anus. Vampires have ever been reported in outer Mongolia, and if Hollywood is any prophet, they will be found waiting for mankind on planets where our rocket ships have not yet landed. Reasonable men want reasonable explanations for phenomena that apparently defy reason, and vampires have had their share of being explained on this side of the supernatural. Bodies unnaturally well preserved in their graves have been referred to soil conditions that retarded decay. A favorite way of dealing with the risen dead, or those found in their coffin with their shrouds chewed or blood on their lips, has been to decide that these were examples of unfortunates prematurely put into their graves. And there are burial traditions that are meant to provide against such accidents. The wake is one such custom. The Jewish practice of sitting with the body for 3 days is another. Sometimes the dead are provided with a bell by which they may signal that an error has been made, and the doors of tombs have been made to open outward, to avoid Roderick Usher's maddening and twice fatal error. Oh, pity me, miserable wretch that I am. I dared not speak. We have put her living in the tomb. Do I not distinguish that heavy and horrible beating of her heart? Madman, madman, I tell you that she now stands without the door. The range of conditions in which corpses can be found is one source of vampire legendary. Another is the treatment the dead are sometimes accorded by the living, particularly by those curious creatures for whom the insert husk of humanity presents an irresistible erotic attraction. The necrophiles, necrophages, and necrosadists among us, or Nella Volta in a chapter whose title is Necrolatry, Necrolatry, or the exquisite cadaver, tells a certain number of these tales, among them that of Alexander Simeon, who began by feeling attracted by dirty linen and then localized his strictly erotic interests on the sheets of deathbeds, and of Victor Artisan, an early 20th century necrophiliac who treated his inert brides with great tenderness, though he could not remember their names, except for one girl named Bertha, who had particularly struck him on account of her beautiful breasts, which attracted him, as he said, like a suckling to its mother. Summers, too, has plenty of examples of necrophagy and necrosadism. He claims, for instance, that the Loeb and Leopold murder case in Chicago in 1924 had necrosadistic elements. Having killed the unfortunate boy, the wretched degenerates violated the body. There is also Felix Blott, a necrophiliac who, when his judge showed horror at his crime, said, "What do you want? Each of us has his passions. As for me, the cadaver is mine." How many more pages are there? Please be close. Getting tired of reading. Jesus Christ, there's at least 8 more, I think. Well, maybe 6. But for necrophilia, the corpses do not even have to be real. Both Summers and Volta quote Leo Taxil's description of a French house of prostitution with a funerary room in it whose walls were covered with black satin. At its center, a rich catafalque, a woman apparently inert, is there, lying in an uncovered coffin, her head reposing on a velvet pillow. All around there are long candles set in large silver candlesticks. In the 4 corners of the room there are funerary urns incense burning, pale shadows which give to the flesh of the imitation dead a cadaverous color. The lewd madman who has paid 10 louis is introduced. There is a prayer stool where he kneels. A harmonium plays the dies irae or the de profundis. In time with this funeral music, the vampire moves with the girl, who stimulates the dead and whose orders are to make no movement, no matter what transpires. Pardon. In Malaysia, the vampires are mostly females and are credited with a great fondness for fish. Supposing, asked the thoughtful 18th century inquirer Dom Calmet, there be any reality in the fact of these apparitions of vampires? Shall they be attributed to God, to angels, to the spirits of these ghosts, or to the devil? Both Summers and Calmet were writing as devout Catholics, and if one is to get at the symbol of the vampire, it is essential to see him against the Christian background. When Ornella Volta writes that vampirism, properly speaking, seems to occur only in Christian countries, she is not ignoring the worldwide manifestations of the legend. Rather, she is recognizing that the vampire of our consciousness takes his shape and meaning from his relationship to Christian belief. Reduced to his essence, it is not hard to see the vampire as a baleful imitation of Christ. Christ's promise is the end of death. Whoso eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood hath eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. For my flesh is meat indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. The vampire seems to promise a similar triumph, a conquest of death, resurrection, and eternal life. It is only that the sponsorship, as it were, is all wrong. Satan, not God, is the source of the energy, so that his gift is a soul-killing imitation of Christ's promise. The vampire's conquest becomes an infinite extension of death. His resurrection has ghastly conditions imposed on it, and his promised eternal life is an animated corporal reality that stinks of the grave. It is hard to believe that anyone would choose the vampire's way, yet the legend has power because it acknowledges the temptation of endless mortality, as well as the widespread, if unspoken, impulse to say no to God. Mortality is what we know, if we remember Eden at all. It is as an irradiated point in time from whose fragrant dullness we escaped. No doubt our purer aspirations are toward that lost imminence, but when we are less than pure, corruptible flesh may be a more imaginable ambition. In Christian countries, the vampire, it is clear, is an outcast from the community. Dying excommunicants were likely to become vampires because they were exempt from the law of dissolution of the mortal remains until the church granted release from the curse entailed upon them. As we have already seen, the vampire prefers intact bodies to rotten ones. Suicides, too, were in danger, as were stillborn children of illegitimate parents, whose parents in turn were illegitimate. Persons cursed by their parents, as well as perjurers who in life called on heaven to witness falsehoods, could find themselves drinking blood. Some vampires were created by the direct intervention of the devil. A witch who copulated with the demon could give birth to vampires. Summers writes that for the hauntings of a vampire, 3 things are necessary: the vampire, the devil, and the permission of Almighty God. Whether it be the demon who is energizing the corpse, or whether it be the dead man himself, who by some dispensation of divine providence has returned in a particular which must be decided severally for each case. The vampire of greatest interest is, of course, the man or woman of overwhelming ego and energy, whose will for an evil life is so great that he will not die, or who, when surprised by death, has reacted with a burst of rage against the inevitable and refuses to lie still. These are the creatures who enter literature as part loathsome, part admirable prototypes of our unworthy hopes. They are evil intelligence saying no, And the allegory always tells us that they keep themselves in terrible motion by preying upon others and feeding upon their vitality. But some part of us is drawn to the monster as we murmur, "Is there any other way? What does he look like? What are his habits? How can he be stopped?" Any 10-year-old on any street in any country in the world where movies are shown can tell you a good deal about the vampire. If a man, he is tall, dark, handsome, and wears an open opera cloak. If a woman, she is usually dark, coldly beautiful, and hypnotically attractive. They both drink the blood of the living if they can get it, though the cameras have recorded more instances of men drinking from the throats of lovely, disheveled girls than scenes in which men bleed for a beautiful vampire's pleasure. The films have even set down, as if they were rigorous, certain rules governing the vampire's behavior. He must, according to them, lie in his coffin by day and may move about only during the hours between sunset and sunrise. Depending on which film one has seen, one can add that the vampire is able to turn himself into a bat, control the animal kingdom to some degree, and on occasion modify the weather. He may be daunted by Christian symbols, the cross, holy water, the host, or by certain plants, the wild rose, blackthorn, and garlic, and everyone knows that the surest way to kill him is to drive a stake through his heart, after which he turns to dust. Surprisingly enough, the budget of information gleaned from films is very Surprisingly enough, this budget of information gleaned from films is very like that which is found in a large body of folklore or tradition about vampires. As Dr. Van Helsing tells us in his pidgin English, all we have to go upon are traditions and superstitions. These do not at the first appear much when the matter is one of life and death, nay, of more than either life or death. Yet must we be satisfied in the first place because we have to be. No other means is at our control, and secondly, because after all these things, tradition and superstition are everything. Tradition and superstition are indeed everything. However, in this chapter, I cannot hope to survey all of those that exist. But because Dracula, as he proudly tells us, is a Sezcali from Transylvania, a glance at Romanian Hungarian traditions and superstitions will not be amiss. In Dracula's bailiwick, then, the blackthorn sewn into one's clothes, the wild rose placed in windows and doors, or garlic plentiful hung about the house, are remedies against his appearance. But a good way to become a vampire is to smoke tobacco or drink wine during Lent. Such a sinner, if he dies soon after, will have only 9 days of peace in the grave, after which he rises, one of the Moroni or Moriu or Strigio. Emily Gerard in 1885 wrote, "More decidedly evil is the Nosferatu, or vampire, in which every Romanian peasant believes as firmly as he does in heaven or hell. There are two sorts of vampires, living and dead. The living vampire is generally the illegitimate offspring of two illegitimate persons, but even a flawless pedigree will not insure anyone against the intrusion of a vampire into their family vault, since every person killed by a Nosferatu becomes likewise a vampire after death, and will continue to suck the blood of other innocent persons till the spirit has been exorcised by opening the grave of the suspected person, and either driving a stake through the corpse or else firing a pistol shot into that coffin, the coffin. To walk smoking round the grave on each anniversary of the death is supposed to be effective in confining the vampire. In very obstinate cases of vampirism, it is recommended to cut off the head and replace it in the coffin with the mouth filled with garlic, or to extract the heart and burn it, strewing its ashes over the grave. That such remedies are often resorted to even now is a well-attested fact, and there are probably few Romanian villages where such have not taken place within the memory of its inhabitants. There is likewise no Romanian village which does not count among its inhabitants some old woman, usually a midwife, versed in the precautions to be taken in order to counteract vampires, and who makes of this science a flourishing trade. She is frequently called in by the family who has lost a member and requested to settle the corpse securely in its coffin, so as to insure it against wandering. The means by which she endeavors to counteract any vampire like instincts which may be lurking are various. Sometimes she drives a nail through the forehead of the deceased, or else rubs the body with the fat of a pig which has been killed on the feast of Saint Ignatius 5 days before Christmas. It is also very usual to lay the thorny branch of a wild rose bush across the body to prevent it leaving the coffin. The Nosferatu can do more than suck blood. It can make newlyweds sterile or impotent. To avoid these dangers, the marriage bed is sprinkled with holy water or ashes taken from holy censers are hidden under it. Other ways to keep the vampire away include putting complicated knots into his coffin for him to untie, or else sprinkling poppy seeds into it for him to count. Presumably, both means were intended to keep the vampire busy with intellectual rather than bloody matters. Speaking of marriages, Tony Fave writes that entire villages and many of them believed firmly that a vampire could continue to sleep with his still living wife at night, and that such a woman made pregnant by the cadaver could give birth to children whose peculiarity was that they had no bones at all. And Montague Summers tells us that in Romania, a vampire, merely by looking at a pregnant woman, can ensure that the child in her womb will be born with his taint. Of all the means available for combating vampires, the most efficacious is to employ the services of a dampire, or at least so it is believed among contemporary gypsies. The dampire is the son of a vampire, and therefore also to destroy the monster, because being born of him, he is able to see him, and the descendants of this sorcerer inherit the occult powers of their father. This profession of dampire may not be passed on by instruction to just anyone. It remains the privilege of such a family. Though the films have given us the vampire as a suave, continental, magnetic figure, the folklore about him is a good deal less flattering. A vampire is generally described as being exceedingly gaunt and lean, with a hideous countenance, and eyes wherein are glinting the red fire of perdition. When, however, he has satiated his lust for warm human blood, his body becomes horribly puffed and bloated, as though he were some great leech gorged and replete to bursting. Cold as ice, or it may be fevered and burning as a hot coal, the skin is deathly pale, but the lips are very full and rich, blob and red, the teeth white and gleaming, and the canine teeth wherewith he bites deep into the neck of his prey to suck thence the vital streams which reanimate his body and invigorate all his forces appear notably sharp and pointed. And Ornella Volta's composite portrait is no more enticing. Vampires differ according to regions in which they are found, but they all have certain characteristics in common, such as an emaciated face with a phosphorescent pallor. The vampire has many thick hairs on his body, which are often reddish in color, and often has hair in the palms of his hands, and blue eyes. The vampire also has swollen, sensual lips, covering sharp canine teeth. Vampires also have extremely long fingernails, pointed ears like bats, fetid breath, and more jerkily showing a tendency to suffer from epilepsy. Their bite has anesthetizing powers. We are, when all is said and done, dealing with a dead man. However much we may invest him with charm or recognize in him the symbolic sexual power of death, the legend wants us to know that he is forbidden, that commerce with him will kill. And what he kills is more than the life of his victim. Are you going to focus? There you go. As Dr. Van Helsing says, life is nothing's. I heed him not. But to fail here to destroy Dracula is not mere life or death. It is that we become as him, that we henceforward become foul things of the night like him, without heart or conscience, preying on the bodies and the souls of those we love best. To us forever are the gates of heaven shut. For who shall open them to us again? We go on for all time abhorred by all, a blot on the face of God's sunshine, an arrow in the side of him who dies for man. And that's the end of chapter 4. I hope chapter 5 is not as long because that was painful to read for an hour and 10 minutes. Yeah, it is going to be just as long. 170 from 134. Jesus. No wonder I put that last chapter off. Goodbye, bros. Goodbye.